Who can prevent forest fires? Only you! Welcome to the Coconino National Forest. We're here at drop point 1 for last week's Naval Observatory prescribed burn. And I'm dressed appropriately because today we're going to be talking about fire restrictions on how to be safe and how to be a responsible outdoor recreationist when coming up here to the Coconino National Forest. Today we have a couple of experts with us. We have Matt McGrath, District Ranger for Coconino National Forest, and True Brown, Fire Management Officer from Coconino National Forest. And they're going to give us a rundown about the fire restrictions that are in place. We're now in fire restriction level stage 1.
Correct.
Stage 1 of 3 stages that are out there. But also, even before any fire restrictions that were implemented on the forest, these guys and their partners were busy doing preemptive measures, such as these prescribed burns, to help mitigate some of the terrible, awful blow-up things that can happen when wildfires do happen. So Matt, could you describe where we are and what you guys did in this area?
Sure, thanks Mayor. So my name is Matt McGrath. I'm the District Ranger here on the Coconino National Forest. We're here on site of the Naval Observatory prescribed fire, which we conducted last week. Here on the Coconino, we're very much a restoration forest. We do a lot of mechanical thinning, timber operations, usually followed by prescribed fire a few years later, and that's exactly what we did here. On the Coconino, on the Flagstaff Ranger District, we generally, 850,000 acres, we generally aim for about 20,000 acres a year of prescribed fire. Oftentimes that's accomplished with 4,000, 5,000, or 6,000 acre burns at one time. This one's a little different. This one was 135 acres, a high complexity burn, as we call it, because we're located in the middle of a U.S. Naval Observatory and several million-dollar homes across the way. This area was thinned 5 or 6 or a few more years ago, and then it took that long for us to get to the right conditions where our fire folks were able to come in and conduct this prescribed fire last week.
Okay, Matt, you mentioned earlier today when we were chatting about the thickness of the forest and how all of these wonderful thick pine trees that you can see up in that area there are what people really love. That's what they associate with the fire, but it's really not healthy, is it? What do you have to say about that, Drew?
Yeah, Mayor, as we were talking about earlier today, and this spot right here is a great example. You know, historically, fire moved across the landscape. Really every 2 to 15 years, it would come across the same piece of ground. And through, fire suppression and, settlement of the West, a lot of fire has been excluded from the ponderosa pine forest, particularly in this ecosystem. And if you look around here, this area that's been treated, off to the east here, a lot of the older growth has been preserved and we've got some regeneration coming up. But then if you look a little bit to the west here, you see, and that's up towards the observatory, an untreated area that has not had fire and or mechanical treatments that's come through. And you can see, we're talking almost potentially 1,000 stems per acre is what we would classify that as, versus here we're looking at really just a couple hundred, minus some of the regeneration. And that was one of the goals with this prescribed burn that we just carried out, was reducing all the regeneration. And if folks can see kind of just behind me here, a lot of that regeneration is browning out now. It didn't torch out when we put fire in here, but it's browning out, and that will kill those little trees. It's also browned out some of the taller trees, but really what we've done there is raise that crown base height, that canopy layer, which makes those trees even more fire resistant in the future. So fire is the tool that we used in this specific piece of ground, and as Matt said, in this high complexity burn, to really reduce those ladder fuels and ensure the long-term sustainability of these older growth trees. And that's really what we're looking for when we're carrying out these prescribed burns, along with the mechanical treatments as well.
And the forest thing is also good for biodiversity. I read, like, one of the things that hikers and campers love about coming up here to the Flagstaff area is getting to see the aspens. Now, too many pine trees are not really good for the aspens, are they? Why not?
Correct. In this area, we're a little bit low elevation for some of the aspens, but in some other areas where we've had a fire recently, museum fire up in the Mount Eldon and the Dry Lake Hills a couple of years ago, we were just up there the other day, and in some of those areas, the aspen is coming back like crazy because it is a fire-dependent species, and it really does it best after that. So that's one of the things that we do with these burns is manage not only for thinning and for fire protection to our communities, but it also improves natural conditions across the forest, which benefits not only aspen, but all the wildlife and other species that we have here.
Okay, so now we're fully in fire restriction stage 1. What does that mean, especially to hikers and campers and other outdoor recreationists that are going to be coming up into the forest? What does that mean?
Yes, so we have 3 stages of fire restrictions. Right now we're in stage 1, which began 3 weeks ago, and that prohibits campfires out in dispersed campsites along the forest, and also it continues to allow campfires in developed campsites. So if folks are in a campground or a picnic area, you can still have a fire. That's stage 1. Here, as conditions continue to dry out here, we'll be looking at going into stage 2 restrictions pretty soon, probably in a week or so. And at that point, there are no campfires anywhere on the forest. So no campfires out at dispersed campsites, no campfires at developed campgrounds or picnic areas. It also prohibits welding or even chainsaw or any combustible engine use between other than very, very, very early in the morning. Have to be finished by 9 a.m. So if we have folks who still need to do some work, whether that's a youth corps cutting trees off of a trail, or whether it's one of our fuels crews doing some preparation work for another prescribed fire this fall or even next year, they can do some work, but they have to be done by 9 a.m. That's stage 2. Then occasionally we go into stage 3 restrictions. Last time we did it here on the Coconino was in 2018, and that involves area closures. Some forests, when they get to severe enough fire conditions, they close the entire forest. Here on the Coconino, we haven't done that. We have a few certain areas that are particularly sensitive and particularly dangerous from a fire perspective, like the San Francisco Peaks and Mount Eldon and the Dry Lake Hills, where during stage 3, those areas are closed to public entry for a couple of reasons. One, to reduce starts. The fewer humans that are in a place, the fewer starts we have. That's a tried true fact. But then also in some of these areas are difficult to evacuate people. So if we had a bunch of people up Humphreys Peak Trail and a fire started on the west side of the peaks and started working its way up, it would be almost impossible to get. Oftentimes we have 500 people on that trail. It would be almost impossible to get them evacuated safely. So it's just better for us to not have anybody up there at all.
You know, in the scope of wildfires here, better to prevent and to pay attention to the restrictions than to go out there and take a chance. You know, I spoke with Matt Nelson, the executive director of the Arizona Trail Association yesterday, and a great deal of the Arizona Trail goes through the Flagstaff area. In fact, they're a community, what do they call it? A community sponsor city up here, so it's a big place for the Arizona Trail. And last year alone, he told me that 84 or so miles were damaged by 5 different wildfires just last year. Okay, now I hear all the time from hikers that do the Arizona Trail, and normally to get on that trail you have to be pretty experienced, and the feedback I get is, I can have a campfire because I'm experienced, it's not going to happen to me. And what's your response to that?
So yes, so we have a lot of easily accessible sections of the Arizona Trail here on the forest. Some are kind of in flatter ground here, like this Ponderosa Pine Forest, and then it gets into the Mount Eldon and the Dry Lake Hills, which is one of our more where we have a little bit more risk involved with wildfire. So we of course always ask those folks to follow whatever fire regulations we have at the time. You know, we often hear from people, I'm really experienced. I've been here all the time. I've been camping since I was a kid, and that's true about me. And I have a lot of experience with fire, but that does not mean that if I have a campfire, we get one gust of wind and one ember flies out into these dry conditions, that fire is going to be up the ridge and gone before I can even call it in. So we very much ask folks to abide by these restrictions. We base them all on scientific indices. True, we can talk about how we measure those, but we don't just do it because we feel like it or because we don't want people out on the forest having a good time. We do it because for a short term, it's the absolute best thing we can do to protect people and the forest and our local communities.
And it's not just campfires that start these wildfires, is it? I'm thinking specifically about the gender reveal party back in 17 and the sawmill fire.
Yes.
What other kind of things do people need to be really careful about when they're out here recreating?
A few things that really folks need to be aware of when they're out recreating are, maintain their equipment properly, using spark arresters on internal combustion devices. Smoking is a huge concern as well. Obviously, fireworks and exploding targets are not allowed on national forest lands. And then shooting is a big one as well, particularly with tracer rounds. in those restricted areas, and just making sure that folks are really aware of those. Even things like parking on tall vegetation is enough to start a fire. Hot catalytic converters and muffler systems, exhaust systems can have been known to spark fires, along with maintaining proper air pressure in their tires. As minute as that may seem, a blown trailer tire can drag and start fires up and down the highway system, along with making sure that chains that attach said trailers to their particular vehicles are attached properly and not dragging on the ground. Because we have had issues where, frankly, we've had fires on 10-mile stretches of highway because of somebody dragging a chain, or, as I said, that blown tire, which causes a significant amount of issues for us. So those are really the big ones that we're asking people to make sure that they're paying attention to, because really all it does take is that one spark, and every time we can eliminate that one ignition source, that's one less wildfire we have to worry about here on the district and forest, and in Arizona, because it's not just Forest Service lands, it is, you know, all forested lands, and that includes state, private, public, across the West.